the biggest reason people don't ask for help. Two things. One is guilt. You start to feel really guilty that you're asking the same person for help over and over again, because that's typically what happens. You have one sibling who's around and you lean on them constantly. And by the time you've leaned on them,
here we go. So Tom, welcome to Unleashed, the dark art of how to make ideas happen, the podcast. Long name, I know.
I didn't know we were getting into the dark arts here, Hussein. I might have to rethink this.
Well, I mean, do you agree it's a dark art? You're entrepreneur. Is there I mean, let's jump right into it since you brought it. Is there a clear path for an entrepreneur to do something, or do you agree it's kind of a dark art?
I mean, that's a very interesting frame that you've put on it. I think that like a dark arts carries like sort of a nefarious connotation in some way. I think that's what you're trying to redefine, though, actually, is sort of, I think that's what you're getting at. I think that the override, so there's so much complexity to doing something that nobody's ever thought of doing before. And it's like almost by definition, you have to like carve through so much of that. So you develop your own skill set going through. I mean, if you're not a good self-teacher, you won't be a good entrepreneur. And if you're not ready to accept the teachings of others, you won't be a good entrepreneur, despite the fact that it's all creating. So yeah, I think I agree with you in the sense that dark art, in that nobody else can understand what it is you do. I think that's probably a sign of a good entrepreneur. If somebody looks at you and they go, how does that person do all those different things? It's probably a good sign, would be my guess.
Cool. So tell us a little bit what you're doing, what you're up to.
Sure. So I've started a company along with a co-founder who came on a little bit later in the game. That's centered on the experience of being a family caregiver. But the broader narrative around it is really a vision to reinvent how communities behave in like a more global and digital first context. And so what I mean by that is, and this is a personal experience for me, and when you saw me pitch the other day, you wouldn't have known this because I didn't bring it up, but when my grandfather had dementia, my mom was primarily charged with taking care of him along with her sister. But I lead with my mom because she's a registered nurse. My dad's a doctor at BC Children's Hospital. My mom was able to not work. She had all the resources and she struggled with that. And I think that's something that people are becoming more familiar with, the struggles that family caregivers endure. But the thing that struck me was, for the first half of it, I was living in Boston for the first couple of years of my grandfather's illness. What do I do from Boston? Like literally, there was nothing I could do aside from once in a while chatting with my mom, maybe getting on the phone with my grandfather, and he would forget about it like 5 minutes later. So, I mean, there wasn't a whole ton that I could actually do from a distance and from like a digital first perspective. And then when I got home, because I moved back to Vancouver shortly after my MBA, I was still ineffective. And I would sit there and I'd find out about times my mom needed my support 3 days too late kind of thing. And I was sitting on the couch and totally like would have jumped to help her out. And I never found out about these moments of need. So our vision is to really restore the fabric that facilitates supporting people in your community. And we're like anchoring that on the crucible of being a caregiver to somebody who's severely sick or injured. So the solution we're proposing is an active assistant named Blue. It's this dog. For anybody watching on the video, it's like a robot dog named Blue. And Blue takes on the responsibility of organizing basically and enabling support. So if you need somebody to give you a ride to the hospital, Blue can find somebody in your private network of supporters that will help you out with that. And if you need to raise funds, whether it's for yourself, maybe the reason you need a ride is to repair your car, or whether it's for a nonprofit or something, and that's a more palatable way to accept support to you is to have people fundraise on your behalf, Blue facilitates that too. And the ultimate vision for that is to have have like restore those contexts where support was made easy when we lived very like proximal to each other. Like you run into your friend at the store and you find out that they're really going through hell, or you know, you go to church or something like that, or you just like, you actually knew your neighbor and you would go and talk to them and say, oh gosh, let me mow your lawn, let me take out your trash, like you have cancer, like let me just help you out. And so that's the kind of thesis, is that just we need to restore that connective tissue and make it easier for people to help each other, because they want to, they're just not getting the opportunities to anymore.
There's so many points that you're saying that I want to jump on.
Yeah.
One of the first one that for me hits very close is that I used to live I was born and raised in Damascus, Syria. Even the neighborhood, and I don't know how it is here or how it was, even the neighborhood or going to my parents' hometown, there's that sense where people actually go, like they form a committee from the neighborhood and they go, you know, visit someone or help someone, or they advocate for someone's help, you know, like this person is in trouble, we need to come together to help them. There's, as you said, running into each other. And it seems like that slowly kind of went away. And you're like, we fear knocking on our neighbor, or why is my neighbor knocking on me? Like, did I do something wrong? Did I, you know, walk a little bit loudly or speak a little loudly? And now they're complaining. We've lost that connection where we need it as human beings. We can't survive without it. So it's fascinating. And now you're using the same thing. That's how it occurs to me. It's that you're using the same thing that we blame for the lack of community, which is technology. You're using that to bring home a sense of community.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's like a bit of tech judo in that sense. Like it's interesting that the conversation around Syria. I mean, I've been fortunate to be like lifelong friends with somebody who works with refugees in Syria, and he moved over there, and he's in a smaller place. I think it's closer to Aleppo than Damascus. But yeah, like the amount of community engagement that he can achieve via old school methods, like knocking on doors and talking to people, is substantial. And what we've seen now is like, it's interesting, like the tech thing, you've been like made a very insightful comment, is that tech has kind of eroded this ability, this natural, like organic grassroots response capability. I think that's humanity's greatest superpower, by the way, is the intrinsic natural compulsion and ability to support each other. Like you don't see that too often unless it's around like animals that hunt in packs or something like that. This is like truly quite a unique thing about humans. And technology has made it such that, you know, we've scaled up everything that we do and the connectivity is huge, but like the ugly backswing of being added to a WhatsApp group where like there's 30 people that want to help out this person with cancer, and before you know it, Bill or Susie has like changed the topic to like what everybody's weekend plans are, and it's becomes like a spam trail of people who in their heart truly want to help this person. Like they truly do. But do I want to like be checking on the Facebook group every 2 days? Do I want to be in this WhatsApp group that is like making my pocket vibrate for hours on end? No. And people get frustrated and they get like really paralyzed. And we're just trying to make like, take all that goodwill and find a different way of extracting it for people, because we think that there's a ton of low-hanging fruit there, and we're just not doing it right now.
Got it. Now, you said that you've done your MBA in Boston. And when was that? What year was that?
Sure. And I hate it when people are all coy about this. It was at Harvard. Like I'll drop the H-bomb, as we always used to call it at school. People have to like really, you know, pretend that they're not elitist. Like, no, there's like that's where it was. That was 2011 to 2013 was when I was living in Boston for the MBA.
All right. And did you do anything before Blue? Like what was your journey like as an entrepreneur or in business to get to Blue?
Yeah, did I do anything? I've just basically got fat on the couch. No, so
like, hey, Blue is now the prevalent thing, right?
Yeah, no, my career is really, really strange in that, like, I don't know what else I'd be doing right now based on my collection of experiences So I studied genetics in my undergrad at the University of British Columbia, which my family, I think, has a collective 7 degrees from UBC. My sister has 3, my dad has 2, and I have 1 from UBC. Really in the family from that school. And I operated on the assumption for most of my life that I would be a physician like my dad. And it was only that when I got out into the world a little bit, I started really questioning the idea of, do I want to be on call to go perform surgery at 3 a.m. and like maybe, you know, once in a while miss my kid's soccer game? And I say that with like outrageous deference to my father. He is just a saint. And like, there is no ill will toward like a missed, I played the tuba in high school, oh my god, like a missed band recital or a rugby game or something like that. But I wanted a bit more control, and so I took an internship after UBC that was in a medical device slash pharma company, and I was running sales, marketing, ops, supply chain, quality control. Like, it was a small company and it afforded the opportunity to do a lot of different things. And my boss there is a woman named Carolyn Cross, an absolute dynamo. And she became a mentor for me. And she told me, your genetics degree is great, but you're going to need to learn how to read a balance sheet and do all the income statement stuff. And she said, big piece of advice, do it at night and keep working for me, or go somewhere where people will give a damn. And that was the ambition. Like, that was the turning point for me to go and pursue an elite institution for the MBA. And since the MBA, it's been a grab bag of, I had an investment fund for a short period of time. I hated it. I hung up the boots before I took anybody's money, thankfully. I worked in a marketplace company called Handy. I helped them launch Canada. They do home services like cleaning, handyman work, that kind of thing. I was the founding employee at a genetic analysis company that focused on the microbiome. So like cell biology and like how communities of bacteria coalesce and impact various systems. And I went to Toronto for 2 years to work in an experience design firm, an innovation consultancy, basically. For anybody that knows IDEO, think IDEO, but experiences instead of products, that kind of thing. And then I left that job to start Blue because I had gotten the opportunity to look at the caregiver space a bit more in depth, understand it. And I just saw, like, this is a massive quagmire that very few people are challenging. And if they do, from like a boastful sense, I was like, I don't think they're approaching it the right way. And there's lots to get into there. But yeah, my career is all over the place and I love it. Like, for a curious person, it's so much fun. I've had just a blast.
So when it came to Blue, can you recall like the first, elements of the idea? How did it come and how did you work on it and evolve it from the first elements? And why the blue dog?
Okay, that one's a big question. So let me talk about the initial idea. It was just the fundamental realization that, and this occurred when I was at this consulting firm, and part of it was the work we were doing, but part of it is just that I've been thinking about this stuff since my grandfather died, was that it finally dawned on me that my experience and my mom's experience were in like absolutely no way unique. And I thought that it was kind of unique for a while. And then I'm like, no, this is a ubiquitous problem. And the biggest piece of the problem, at the most foundational, like one word, it's isolation. And so when I think about isolation, what are the technologies that are cropping up nowadays that would be well suited to solve isolation? It's like, it's not blockchain or anything like that. It's conversational technology. And I sort of thought, okay. So current gold standard for people organizing support around somebody is like a spreadsheet, an email group, WhatsApp, Facebook, something like that. And basically, if you're fortunate enough to have somebody do that work on your behalf, you can navigate the experience of being a caregiver with some grace, not a lot. If you don't, your hair is on fire. I'm saying this with the two of us experts in hair on the call. And And so to me, it was just this confluence of like, okay, conversational tech is at a point now where it can be more than answering dumb questions on an FAQ page. It can actually do things in the real world if done properly. And the fact that people are very comfortable conversing via text message and less comfortable over the phone, I find it very troubling. And this plays into the isolation. That type of communication, our instinct is to fight it. Like we need to be forcing people to get on the phone with people they care about and whatever. But the norm for people, how they communicate now, is to send like a 1-sentence message every once in a while and to receive one every once in a while, and be totally comfortable with ending a conversation without wrapping it up. And that part is very crucial too, is that, you know, if I said to you, Hussein, like, hey buddy, how you doing, on a text message, and I don't even hear back from you, like it kind of just fades away. Now, if I ran into you at the supermarket and I said, hey, how you doing? And you just like didn't answer and you kind of like, whatever, and walked away, I'd be like, oh, is he okay? We've lost all that context, all that nuance to those conversations.
Yeah.
And now this conversational piece to come back to like when it was there, it's like we're at the point that we can scale and do effective management, but also that the conversational tech with enough work will start to pick up on some of that nuance eventually. And if we can get ahead and have something that's designed for the basics, and then let it learn to get good at the nuances, then we've created something that like can tie communities together without us really having to worry about it. And time is at a premium for everybody, and access to tech, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, I think that this is the confluence of a bunch of cultural and technological pieces that are all coming together to make this a viable product all of a sudden.
That's interesting. So is your kind of interaction with all of this has to do with a ton of research on the topic? Did you stumble on it and were interested, or was something percolating in your head and you started kind of collecting stuff along the way?
Yeah, and guilt was percolating in my head for years. Honestly, no, I'm not kidding. Like I still regret not doing more for my mom when my grandfather was sick. And she would argue with me and whatever, and I'd be like, no, like honestly, I lived nearby, and like I could have easily done more. And it was just never positioned to me as like this is something easy you can do to make a difference today. And that's what people need now. They need that now. Like if you live next door and you can see what's going on, easy. I know how to pitch in. I'll just do it. Like you don't even wait to be at. That's actually great advice. If you know somebody who is dealing with a medical problem and you're like, should I do something? Just do it. just do it. Don't wait for them to like ask you, because they're not going to ask you. That's the other piece, is they feel too much guilt and they don't think about.
If I jump in here, since you're into this, what is it? And maybe this is, I don't know if it's outside the topic, but this is a conversation. I want to ask this question. What do you think for you is the reason why we don't ask for help? I mean, we thrive on this. We know we need it. We know we need other people. Is it something new? Is it something we've always had as human beings? Like, why is it that we struggle to ask for help? And how can Blue help with that?
There's so much context that goes into this question, no matter like what you're talking about. But I'd say like the biggest reason people don't ask for help, two things. One is guilt. You start to feel really guilty that you're asking the same person for help over and over again, because that's typically what happens. You know, you have one sibling who's around and you lean on them constantly. And by the time you've leaned on them like 2 or 3 times, you sort of start to feel guilty about leaning on them. And this is an experience that typically will last years. So you need more hands that are immediately being asked for the first time. I think that's like a big key to democratizing that burden. Caregivers would hate me for calling it burden, but let's call it what it is. This is something that's weighing a lot of people down. So that's one piece. The other piece is just mental capacity. So if you lived in a village, you know, the 5 people around you it's very easy to like keep that straight, who's been helping you and what's going on. But if you live like a large number of people do nowadays, where you have friends, acquaintances, colleagues scattered all over the place in like distributed nodes, like, and even just now, like just pure smear of distribution as opposed to just in nodes is more possible. How do you even keep that straight in your head when like your kid has cancer and you're trying to figure out all the things that go into that? It's beyond anybody. It's beyond anybody. And I'll add to that in that it's never been more overwhelming to be a caregiver and more common. And the big pieces there are that we've executed a huge trade-off. This is from my like genetics and whatever days. We've executed a huge trade-off. A triumph of medicine is to be very good at treating acute diseases and very bad at treating chronic diseases. And so while we've leveled off acute diseases, chronic diseases are way on the rise and we don't know how to deal with it. So the response of the medical system is push responsibility for care back into the home. So like the line between a professional and a family caregiver has been completely blurred to the point that like if you speak to the extreme case is always like kids with cancer or other diseases. Oncology moms, or onc moms as they might call themselves, they will blow your mind with how much they know about cancer, what the side effects of each drug are, what the dosages are per kilogram. They know all this stuff. It's wild. Like they are just experts. They are basically amateur oncologists. And so the load, and like I saw somebody in the cancer community here in BC, a teenage girl changing her own nasal gastric tube the other day on Instagram. And so what that involves is basically shoving a tube through your nose and then down into your stomach. She did this to herself.
Holy crap.
And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, like 40 years ago, would a 15-year-old girl have been inserting her own nasal gastric tube? Nah, no chance, no chance, no chance. And so think about that in terms of like every other medical condition and how much is going on at home, and just try to imagine yourself thinking, you know what? I need a ride. I'm going to ask like the 30th person on my Rolodex, or I'm going to ask all 30 of them in a row. Yeah, right. You don't have time. So there's this crazy gap between this plethora of people willing to support you during this crazy, crazy period in your life, and a complete inability to ask them. Even if you felt okay with it, even if you weren't feeling guilty about it, just getting to that 30th person on the list, it's nuts. So we need to automate that effectively, get rid of all that friction.
That's cool. So where are you right now in the process? I know that you're pitching right now, you're raising.
Oh yeah.
Tell us about the stages right now, and what are you going to do with what you accomplished? Let's say if you raise right now, where are you going to spend it? What's next for Blue?
Right. Yeah. So we've been very deliberate in our testing strategy for the product. So we're entering into a couple of pilots with major children's hospitals in Canada. And this is the biggest problem. We have to talk about the strategy and everything to understand where we're going to go with the spend. And it's something I've kind of glossed over in this chat, but it's really important to unpack, is that for the same reasons that asking for help is difficult, caregivers are, and self-managed patients who we also deal with, are lousy customers. Like if you went into a lab and designed a customer that was bad, you'd get an overwhelmed person who's potentially financially jeopardized. A lot of these people lose their jobs because they have to take care of their loved one. They're in no decision to make a purchase. They're in no condition to make a purchasing decision. And they probably don't have the money or time to evaluate anything like that. So a big hill that a lot of people addressing this market die on, proverbially, is figuring out who their customer actually is. Like the person at the center of our communities is somebody with a sick family member, or they're sick themselves. We treat our customer like we view our customer as some kind of care organization. This will vary across geographies, that's committed to improving the experience of that family. So broadly, you can think of that as a health-oriented not-for-profit group. That could be a hospital foundation. It could be like a cancer society, a national cancer society, that kind of thing. And those folks are very much concerned with improving the patient experience, as it's like now formally called. So we have engaged these children's hospitals because they're very concerned with making sure that there's something that's being done to support these folks when they're outside the walls of the hospital. They're very good. They have nurses and social workers that do so much for these families and kids when they're at the hospital. But what happens when the recipient of a heart transplant goes home? What happens when a child who's been at Children's Hospital for a couple years with some problem passes the age that you're really eligible to be at the Children's Hospital and they're suddenly transitioned into adult care? That is a huge problem. And these organizations are primarily concerned with improving that experience. So value for them that we give is they can basically create community support programs that are powered by that person's own community and not them in an instant. So we just shove blue into that situation. Person builds their own private network of support, and the hospital watches all the impact flow in around that person or the nonprofit, and they can collect that impact, aggregate it, de-identify it, and report it out to donors and say, look, we've enabled X number of hours and X number of dollars around families that are going through various medical conditions or a single medical condition over the course of this past year, this past month, this past day, because we do it all through this tech platform that we could publish this to a Twitter feed if we wanted to. So as we go forward, the next big piece is to really start to scale out how Blue behaves in an institutional environment. We've been focused purely on single family exercises right now. So we supported a number of families with a sick family member, saw great results. People were getting support in the form of rides. Like we had one family get their yard work done over the weekend when they were in the hospital for the weekend. Somebody came over and mowed their lawn and did their garden. Somebody volunteered to do that in, I think it was 8 minutes. We had somebody who was willing to go and do manual labor on their front lawn. We got a young woman now, a Nintendo Switch. We had that, even though the supply chain was completely zonked for Nintendo, they shut everything down. We had a Switch in her living room in 48 hours, even though you couldn't buy one in stores. Like we had to go out and find one. It was a crazy, crazy journey for that. But now we need to start thinking like, okay, what does it look like if the hospital enables this for 500 families? And making sure that that all flows properly. So the big piece now is to go from like, I'd call it like product proof to market proof, and really start to step on the gas in that regard. And once we really solidify how those interactions work, scale the hell out of them.
Yeah. And I'm curious in regards to when you're talking about the customer and, in your words, it's like you couldn't have designed the customer worse, and I get that.
Yeah.
How did you discover that? Where was the first journey about talking to customers? Because you have some experience. Did you rely only on your experience and what you thought? What kind of conversations you had? How many conversations you had?
Yeah, no, I didn't rely just on my experience. I spoke a ton with caregivers themselves, people like me who would prefer to help if they could and never really know what to do. But a lot of the foundational knowledge was spent talking, actually, and it took me a long time to consider them clients because I was just viewing them as experts. But people who are in management roles at those nonprofits have a real finger on the pulse for what these folks are going through. And there's even the big thing to me, really more than the overload and stress, is the financial toxicity that families go through. And that's a term in medicine now. Financial toxicity is usually defined as a reason for discontinuing your meds. So if you're financially responsible for your meds and your rent, and both come due at the same time, and you don't have enough money and you discontinue your meds, that's called financial toxicity. So it's a reason to stop taking your medication. Typically we think about, you get night sweats or you have uncontrollable organ functions. I'll keep it clean. These types of things might stop you from taking your medicine. It's a huge problem. And, that's just something that I look at this system, and a governing principle for me is like and it's like part of the Hippocratic oath. I'm not a doctor, but it's good to think about things this way sometimes, is just to do no harm. And honestly, like, those folks should not be handed another bill. Like, I don't want to give somebody who's got anything like that in their house another thing to pay. And so the entire journey, I've been trying to figure out ways to not make that person hold the bag. And that's been like a huge, like, must have on the list. Like, if I came to a model that worked because we were getting like patients to pay, like, I don't think I want that. And I think it's helped focus sort of the approach to the market quite a bit.
That's interesting. What was there any other big barriers, as big as, let's say, payment, or relatively close, when it comes to adoption by them and using Blue?
Sure. So like one big piece that we've done that's very counter to what a lot of people in the market are doing is to focus on children's health to begin. And that starts with like the basic understanding of this market. If you just looked at it on the surface, Excel spreadsheet, whatever, it's like, go work in dementia, go work in Alzheimer's, go work in advanced aging. And because the market is huge, and I'm familiar with it, that was the problem that my family went through. The issues are psychological, they're financial, there's lots of things that are going on. But like, at the end of the day, the biggest pieces the biggest piece in my mind is the psychological aspect that deals with the social contract to why you might use a product like this. And if you think about somebody with an aging parent, maybe they have Parkinson's or something like that. And I would say especially dementia, because dementia has been normalized to such an extent that people sort of just equate dementia with aging. It's not, but that's what we tend to think of it as. There's this element of, there's a lot of things at play. There's an element of, well, everybody's dad is going to get sick. Everybody's mom is going to get dementia. Like, do you really need my help? That's kind of your job, is how people, they never articulate it that way because it feels like evil to say that. But it's true in that, like, we don't hear, oh, my dad has dementia, and immediately go like, oh, I can't believe it. Like, that's so terrible. People don't have that reaction to dementia. And there's lots of things, like, there's no moment where like dementia just comes. It's like a slow degradation mentally. It's just normalized. It's like, there's a lot there that like the reaction doesn't come swiftly. And
there has been like with the COVID kind of pandemic, there's that surprising thing that, oh, they're old, so what's the problem? Like, people die. Like,
don't get me started.
Yeah. so there is that thing. So I get it. Yeah. Please continue.
Yeah. So there's that. And so it doesn't elicit like the true thing that summons an entire community around somebody is not severity. Like, dementia is ultra severe. I'm not sure that there's a harder one to deal with as a caregiver, because you're truly competing with the priorities of that person's. If you think about it, a caregiver has to compete with the wants, needs, priorities of their parent, if that makes sense. So my grandfather would have always wanted to wear a suit. He might not have felt super comfortable if somebody came over to visit him and like viewed him as a charity case or something like that. Whereas if you're dealing with taking care of a child, that the child's opinion is important. And if they're like a teen, even, like, sure, like, listen to them. But at the end of the day, the ultimate choice lies with the parent. So there's a lot of stuff at play. And from a business point of view, it's so crowded in dementia and aging. Like, the number of companies that are trying to put like an iPad in a senior's home, like, it will drive you crazy if you try to count them. There must be hundreds of these companies that have a way that they've figured out to make it so grandpa can use an iPad. In my opinion, grandpa doesn't want to use an iPad. Like, that's just not a thing. I've become good friends with some of these families going through childhood problems, and it is just so unfair what they're going through, and they deserve to have a community around them. So interestingly, I was thinking about this in the last day or so. I feel like now I'm fundraising on behalf of kids with cancer. And that is a very good frame for me to think about this, because like I will not compromise now. It's like I'm often deferential in some ways. Like I'm loud and I'm boisterous and whatever, but I'm pretty easy to work with, I think. No, we are doing this to make sure that these kids and their families have the support they need, because they've been dealt a bad hand, and it's about time that we all start pitching in around them in a way that actually matters and helps.
How is this sense of mission change how you approach things and change your decisions into who you work with, what next steps you do? Does it impact it? How does it impact it?
I think that if that's not at the center of everything you do, you're making a bit of a mistake. So I think like the very simple answer, Hussein, is like, it's everything. It's everything. I mean, I've had some investors with, deep pockets say like, you need to rush this thing out of the market and go for it. To me, that's an investor whose money I don't want, because the idea that they can't accept that introducing a faulty Instagram competitor is different from introducing a faulty cancer support product is very troubling. So I think you have to infuse that from top to bottom in all the things you do, is to remember like, if you want to build a community structure, the remnants of those decisions will persist throughout the entire thing. And if you hire people that don't believe in community the way you do, if you accept money from people that don't believe in that stuff, it will just take you down. It will take you off your main path. I don't think it would take you down the wrong path, but you'd get distracted by their priorities, I think, a bit too often. So it's at the center. It's at the absolute center. It's more important than my personal preferences. It's like, this is about, I think I said at the beginning, like redefining how these communities work. And I think at the center, I don't want to sound socialist or anything like that, but there's a difference between somebody who's not pulling their fair share and somebody who's legitimately been given, the worst hand you could imagine. And so we're trying really hard to reorient thinking around that. Another piece of that plays into like the why wait on dementia is, I think it's easier to change behaviors with this really compelling story. And eventually, once people have used Blue to support a family with a childhood problem, they'll look at the problem of dementia in a wholly different way and say, oh, it was so easy to support a kid with cancer last time. I'll sign up to support somebody dealing with dementia because I know that it's not that big of a deal. I just can help out once in a while and it works. My biggest inspiration, I'm sorry to take this like off on another track.
Go ahead.
One of my biggest inspirations for this is actually, I think they structured it in a nonprofit way, but it's called Be My Eyes. Have you heard of Be My Eyes before?
No, not at all.
Such a cool idea. This dude, I want to say he's in Denmark, but for sure he's in Scandinavia somewhere, had the insight that Apple has, I'm not a huge fan of Apple, but they've done one thing that's really cool. They've enabled really sophisticated features for visually impaired people in iPhones. Mm-hmm. So basically, there are a ton of blind people walking around with iPhones in their pockets. And this guy just goes, well, that's really interesting. And he's like, so they have a camera that they just don't use. Is that like basically what we're observing in the market? And he's like, yeah, they have functional cameras in their pockets. So this guy sets up effectively like a chat roulette Skype feature for blind people to push a button and get visual assistance from a volunteer somewhere in the world. So they're like in their fridge. They don't know if their milk is expired. They hit the button. Somebody picks up the phone on the other side of the world and says, oh, the expiry date is XYZ. You're okay to drink it. Or they're in an airport. Seems like a fond memory at this point, but they're in an airport and they don't know where their gate is. And they get on a video call with a stranger and the stranger says, oh, I see the signs. Keep going straight. You're going in the right direction.
Oh, fascinating.
their biggest complaint, Hussein, their biggest complaint is that people who sign up to volunteer complain that they don't get enough phone calls. They want to help more often than they're getting the opportunity to do so. And to me, that was like the most striking piece of evidence that, like, if you're this willing to do a good thing for a stranger, you should be equally, if not more, willing to do something for somebody that you actually know. And the fact that it's not happening right now, that's the thing that, you know, it's like a knife in my heart. I look at this and I'm like, there should be people helping you right now that aren't doing it. And they would do it. They just don't know what to do.
Oh, I completely agree. I think it's not getting like enough help and enough things done in the world is not for lack of people who want to help. There's more than enough people. Is the structures, the organizational abilities, the way to nurture that is not there. And that's what I was fascinated with Blue. Now you're more on the business side and you study genetics.
Yep.
So is it fair to assume you didn't build the technology? not to kind of assume, is it fair to assume that? And how did you go about finding someone to help you build that? Tell us a little bit about your team, your co-founders.
I'll try not to be too offended by that, but you're bang on, dude. I can't code. I can't do anything like that. But what I do have a pretty good eye for is spotting special people. And I actually was, I would say, like, the greatest privilege in life is to be friends with someone you admire. And so if you use that as the filter, like for hiring too, if you can hire someone you admire, holy crap, you've got it nailed. And I counted on some advice from some more technically minded people about like what kind of products and basically what would go into a stack of a product like this. More like CTO types that would say, oh, you know, you need this. And then for the biggest piece of what we work on is like the natural language processing capability that actually has to pick up what people are saying and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And after a bunch of back and forth, the winner to me was this thing called Dialogflow. And Dialogflow, to me, the big advantages are really advanced NLP and natural language processing. And it plugs into like a vast spectrum of other devices and channels. So eventually we want Blue to be available in WhatsApp, on your Google Home, like in Slack and Messenger and all these types of things. So like Blue meets you where you are, not the other way around. That's the goal. And so I went on LinkedIn and I typed in Dialogflow and I hit enter, and there's this one profile at the top. Everything else is San Francisco, Mumbai, New York, whatever. And there's this guy in Burnaby, which is a suburb of Vancouver. And I'm like, wait, is LinkedIn playing a joke on me? Like they're just putting the local guy first, right? That's got to be it. So I look at the profile and, you know, and his profile is like built a Dialogflow assistant on Google Home for Best Buy Canada. I'm like, Best Buy's not exactly the crucible of innovation. So, but this guy's local and he's looked at Dialogflow for the past couple of years. Gotta meet him, gotta have a beer. My biggest pet peeve is when people add me on LinkedIn without any context. Oh my God, I hate it. It drives me crazy. And at least include a note or something. So I'm thinking like, how should I get in touch with this guy? Like totally filtering on my own total like foibles and whatever. And so because this is better for some reason in my head, I slid into his DMs on Instagram and messaged him there. I found him on Instagram and sent him a note. And I said, this is what I'm built. This is what I want to build. I need to talk to you and see if you're interested. And so we went out and he basically told me all the ways in which I had it wrong, but in a way that was like really constructive. And Dylan is his name, Dylan Byth, and he's been just a joy. Like I knew it. And like within 20 minutes, I'm like, this is the guy. Like I need him. Like it can't go anywhere without this guy. He understands what I'm doing. And on top of that, we've done, before I met Dylan, I pledged equity to charity through something called the Upside Foundation of Canada. People in the States might be more familiar with like Pledge 1% or all those types of things, but you can give equity.
I love it. Yeah. We have a one episode planned with them.
With Upside, with Jen?
Yeah.
Oh, Jen is fabulous. You'll have such a good episode with her. Like I almost want to be there. And I had chosen BC Children's. I have deep ties there, and Toronto Sick Kids. I've spent some time in Toronto too. And I asked Dylan if he was comfortable with those choices. And it turned out that Dylan's sister has cystic fibrosis, and he's been through all this like throughout his whole life too. And so I was like, yeah, I nailed this one. Dylan came, started as an employee, was clearly like exactly what I thought he was. So tip of the hat to me, but really bigger tip of the hat to Dylan for being a rock star. And the biggest validation too was that all of his most talented colleagues were all just like, I want to be a part of it too. Like, let me do like let me do some contracting on the side. Let me do like this. So Dylan had access to this bevy of contract engineers. So we've been able to really like not grow our team and be pretty capital efficient for the first stage of the company. But now's the time where we start like really building out a real team. It's been the two of us plus part-timers, contract workers, hourlies for the entire duration of the company. I think we've accomplished quite a bit just on the two of our backs. So, but it's time. It's time. We need to go bigger.
Fascinating story. Mm-hmm. So when did you choose the blue dog and why?
So this is a good story, and I think it's a good moment for me to eat my humble pie, is that when I was at the firm in Toronto, one of my brilliant colleagues, I started telling people that I was leaving and telling them what I was going to do. And one of my colleagues, Chrissy, she just said, give it a human name and a human personality so that people connect to it. And it was totally the right advice. And so I sat there and I thought, okay, well, what's a good name for a caregiver's assistant? And I thought, Caroline. It's a pun between care and alignment. And also for some people, they went to online. And I'm like, I'm cool with that association too, but it was really about alignment and care. And so I went and I'm like, Caroline, that's the name of our assistant, done. And had like illustrations done. And there's this robot, like kind of looked like the robot from the Jetsons or something with like pink hair and stuff. It was actually really cool. But then when Dylan came along, we started like having discussions and we were like, is it okay that like, this is a female assistant? Like, is that something that was a mistake? And I started to do a bunch of reading on the topic. And there's a huge discussion happening about gender neutrality in AI. Mm-hmm. And there's a paper that's called, published by UNESCO. It's called I'd Blush If I Could. And that was the response that Siri would give when somebody called her a bitch or something like awful. Something, anytime somebody said something awful to Siri, she would deflect. And the unpacking of this narrative is that like, since the dawn of AI as a concept, we've been naming AI and giving it female personalities to confer some sense of warmth to the piece of AI that's doing this job. So like you could think about Alexa, the Google Home's default voice is female, but you can go back into science fiction and it's like the computer in Star Trek has a female voice. It was Gene Roddenberry's wife. And the consequence, and all the evil robots are male, like Hal from Space Odyssey and whatever. And when we started to think about it, now the biggest problem is like young boys calling Alexa terrible names in front of their brothers and normalizing this like subjugation of women as laborers. Mm-hmm. And in caregiving, depending on what resource you look at, 2/3 to 3/4 of family caregivers are female. And so by creating a female protagonist to our story, I thought at the beginning, this is kind of like honoring it. And then I was like, nope, we're reinforcing a very flawed narrative that this is a woman's job. So scrapped Caroline, did like a full mea culpa article that I published and like, it's like, this is how we got it wrong. Basically, I just gave the entire article ad lib just now. And Dylan and I set about wondering like, what is a good replacement for this that we can make genderless and whatever. And so we arrived at a dog named Blue, a robot dog, such that you don't think that you're ever talking to a real dog or something. I don't want to get inside the psychology of too many people that would make that mistake, but regardless, we just wanted it to be very clear that this is, and it's meant to be like a herding dog, like a sheepdog or a border collie or something like that. And so this is a personality that is the norm, and the expectation is that it does the work of, you know, herding and like getting a community to work. It's a community of sheep and like in nature, but it does that work, does so gladly, always has energy, never wants to stop, and is just like a total joy to be around. And so we had the art done and we're like, yeah, we like that. That's pretty cool. And so we went ahead with it, and it seems to be getting good response. People seem to like Blue a lot. I certainly do. And I'll share one little nugget of like just super geeky like tech insider stuff. You can get domain names that end in like .color, like .red, .yellow, .blue. So we actually hide our brand in the domain, in the suffix of the domain name, which is like, instead of .com, we use .blue, and we can have all sorts of fun with that and keep our domains like nice and tight for posterity's sake. So that's like our secret little motivation. Genderless dog name Blue, and we hit it right in the domain name.
And the name, and to name it as a color as well, also removes the gender from it, right? So
well, it's interesting. Yeah. Most people assume blue is male when they look at blue, which is the mistake I would prefer. If they're gonna err on one side, we wanted it to be male, and so they did the job. I haven't had anybody call Blue she yet, I don't think.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, it's been a very, very interesting, and Blue is used for both genders of dogs, but yeah, I don't think anybody's said she for Blue, which is what we wanted. And that's, again, to just not be part of that narrative of continued subjugation of female technology, like of AI.
Fascinating. Yeah. Well, Tom, thank you very much for taking the time to like take us along the journey of Blue since inception, and your entrepreneurial thoughts. I wish you all the best. This has been fascinating, and I look forward to having you again when you've raised and take it forward as well. And wish you all the best.
Thanks, Hussein. I will say that this is. I'm always surprised when I meet somebody in Vancouver that I feel like I should have known for a long time, and you're one of those folks. Total privilege to be on your show, man. This has been fun. I feel like I've just been talking about myself, which says something about me that I'm not entirely comfortable with. But yeah, good luck with the book. And thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. Pleasure is mine.